Next panelist is Dr. Evan Andrews, an environmental policy scientist. He holds a postdoctoral research fellowship at the Ocean Frontier Insitute and Too Big to Ignore, a global partnership for small-scale fisheries research, and is based at Memorial University of Newfoundland in St. John's, Canada. He's the co-founder and lead for the Research Network for Small-Scale Fisheries in Canada and is currently serving as vice president of the Society of Policy Scientists. Evan, thank you so much, and you have 5 minutes for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just one moment here. Yeah, I'm really happy to join you all today. And today I wanted to talk directly about this notion of blue justice, including what it is, who it's for, what it does, and what its relationship to transdisciplinarity, and how it might apply in places like Canada and certainly beyond. And to start, I want to take you all over to Chiang Mai, Thailand, in 2018 for the Third World Small Scale Fisheries Congress. Some of you may have been there, certainly Mirella, who's going to present next. On the final day, there were about 400 people in a large conference room, many of whom were concerned about how intensifying calls for blue growth and a blue economy around the world might affect small-scale fisheries and the coastal communities that rely on them. A fisheries researcher from South Africa, Moniba Isaacs, presented this notion of blue justice, arguing that all involved actors in fisheries governance and in science should come together to critically examine what the blue economy or blue growth initiatives might mean for small-scale fisheries in their communities. And so ultimately the idea was seeded that blue justice is for getting the blue economy right for small-scale fisheries and their communities. So what does blue justice do? And here's this figure on the left. Blue justice can be thought of as this multi-dimensional lens through which we can understand many struggles of small-scale fisheries that we can associate as forms of injustice. And these, I said, are depicted on the left here in the slide, which draws and combines evidence about injustices documented from a massive volume of global research and knowledge. And in looking at its dimensions, imagine the power of this kind of lens to assess policy problems, new initiatives, planning, planning, and of course, research challenges associated with the blue economy and beyond. And many of these have been brought together in cases for an upcoming Springer volume called Blue Justice, a small-scale fisheries and a sustainable ocean economy, in which I submitted a chapter with some cases in Atlantic Canada. I'm also using storytelling data, which we'll talk about hopefully more during the panel conversation, from inshore fishers in Newfoundland to identify their desires for a just future. We call this paper Imagine Blue Justice. And so these are some of the opportunities to leverage blue justice here in Canada and certainly demonstrative around the world. So how does this apply in places like Canada? Well, to answer this, I want to take a step back. We know that a blue economy is being developed, and we can anticipate some injustices associated with plan establishment, but there are bigger questions about small-scale fisheries in Canada and perhaps in other more developed countries, and that is, are there small-scale fisheries in these places? If so, what do they look like? How are they doing? And how are they treated? And answering these kind of questions is pretty important and timely, particularly in relation to the blue economy. So, for example, Canada has signed on to a friend of the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries, or the SSF guidelines. We don't really know what kind of friend Canada will be and how that'll play out in places like Atlantic Canada. But pressure will be on to find out, as next year is the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. More broadly, there's interest in the federal government to understand how to advance equity and inclusion in fisheries and oceans. So there are opportunities here that we're taking to use this notion of blue justice in 2022 to try to make some real change. So what are we doing about this? And sorry, my screen is flipping around here. What are we doing this? Well, I wanted to share some examples in which we're answering some basic questions about small-scale fisheries in Canada, leveraging transdisciplinarity, so bringing together the different kinds of knowledge and science and different forms together to transform the lens with which we're seeing fisheries and their governance. The first is we're now collecting stories and experiences from fishers, researchers, government folks, and civil society organizations about small-scale fisheries in Canada in a new ebook called Thinking Big About Small-Scale Fisheries in Canada. So far, we have over 75 folks contributing to the ebook, and most of them are actually non-academic partners, which is really great to see in terms of understanding the problems that are out there. And we're going to launch this ebook next year. There's still time to contribute if you're in Canada, so reach out to me. The second and final thing I wanted to say is that we have this upcoming 4th World Small Scale Fisheries Congress and a regional congress held in St. John's for North America. This is co-hosted by Too Big to Ignore and the Ocean Frontier Institute, and it will be a great time to come together and foster bright spots and alternatives guided by this notion of blue justice for getting the blue economy right, among other themes such as adaptation, aquaculture, governance, the meaning of small, and the future. So join us next year, and I'm happy to answer some questions later.
Thanks very much, Evan. And